Okay, good, the mic's on. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Clint Ancker. I'm the director of the Combined Arms Doctrine Directorate out at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And I want to talk to you today about where we're at on Doctrine 2015. Before I start, if you'd looked for Army Doctrine 3 years ago, you'd have found 550 to 600 field manuals, all of them behind a CADD card-enabled firewall. And if you wanted access to those, you pretty much had to know how to get to them and exactly what you were looking for. About 2.5 years ago, 2 years ago, we were challenged to do that right there. Categorize their manuals differently, reduce their length and number.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join us at noon in booth 539 for a presentation of a new television show on the Oprah Winfrey Network, Married to the Army.
Okay. Anyway, reduce length and number using emergent technologies, make them more accessible and more collaborative. And that started us on a program that became known as Doctrine 2015. Next slide, please. So this is what it looks like. And the first thing to notice is that we have categorized manuals in 4 different categories. We have always talked about doctrine being consisting of fundamental principles, tactics, techniques, and procedures. And this breaks out each of those into a different category. This is a true hierarchy. So if you look at these, it goes from general to specific, and it also reflects the rate at which these things change. So if you look at the top level, the Army Doctrine publications, those should be relatively stable. By the time you get down to the techniques publications, they should change relatively rapidly, and I'll show you how we're going to make that happen. In terms of collaboration, we are bringing in folks from the operating force on a regular basis to sit down with the doctrine authors and provide their wisdom based on operational experience. And we've done this on a number of these already and have made some changes based on input from the field. In addition, General Cohn has tasked TRADOC to assign some of his very best people into the doctrine business. So we've got a large cadre of folks with recent operational experience working as doctrine authors. Next slide. So if you look at the Army Doctrine publications, we've gone from essentially field manuals that were maybe 200 pages to something that looks like this, anywhere from 7 to 15 pages in a 6x9 format, truly fundamental principles that guide the employment of forces. There's 15 of those. You've got the Army at the top. You've got leadership, training, and operations at the next level. Below that, you get the elements of decisive action, offense, defense support of civil authorities, stability, the operations process and terms and graphics, which are the language of the profession. And then below that, you get the warfighting functions. Now, in terms of using technology, for this, we're going to have a video book which will lay out the foundation of each of these graphically, and I'm going to give you a very short preview of what that might look like. So go ahead and run that demo, please.
In Mission Command, the role of the commander is to direct and lead from the beginning of planning throughout execution, all the while assessing the situation and adjusting as necessary for successful mission accomplishment. Commanders blend the art of command and the science of control to drive the operations process. They also understand, visualize, describe, direct.
Okay, and then it will go on with the scenario, and it will talk about how the fundamental principles are applied in specific circumstances. And it'll cover all 15 of those Army Doctrine publications. But when you go from a 200-page manual like FM30 down to 15 pages, obviously there's a fair amount of content that's lost. So the next category, Army Doctrine reference publications, a little bit more information, generally less than 100 pages. All of them have come in at slightly less than that. And what the Army Doctrine reference publications do is simply expand on what's in the ADP for those people that need more information. Now, for each of these, we're going to do an interactive media instruction guide, a DVD or a web-based program where somebody that really wants to get into this in more detail can find a self-paced instructional video. So go ahead and click that demo, please, and just give you a very
Commander's
rough idea of
visualization
what
is
this
the
looks
mental
like.
process of developing situational understanding, determining a desired end state, and envisioning the broad sequence of events by which the force will achieve that end state. Click each tab to learn more.
And then periodically throughout this thing, you'll have a check on learning where you'll be asked a number of questions. If you get the correct answer, it'll simply tell you it's correct. If you get an incorrect answer, it'll take you to the appropriate place in the manual where you can find that answer. So go ahead and close that out, please, Joe. Next, you get field manuals. There's going to be 50 field manuals. I'll show you a slide in a second on what they look like. This is where you're going to find tactics. They are capped at about 200 pages. Every branch has its own field manual. And then in the procedures category, in the appendices, are those things that are prescriptive. Now, very little of Doctrine's prescriptive, but things like the 9-line medevac report, fire support control measures, graphics, etc., that have to be applied without judgment will be found in the prescription piece. Now, one of the more interesting things that we've done is put together a Doctrine comprehensive guide. And this is a DVD right now, although we'll eventually have a web-based application and also an app for mobile devices. There we go. So if you go to Joint and Multinational in there, you get a lot of documents that have to do with national security. You can get into Joint Doctrine through the JDICE, or you can get into Service Doctrine through each of those tabs there, and of course you can get Multinational Doctrine through NATO and ABCA. Those are all hot links to websites. If you go back to the home page and click on Launch the Guide, you get that same presentation with all the ADPs on there. And for example, if you want to know more about sustainment, you click on ADP 4.0. It shows you the logic map that's in the ADP, but what's really powerful about this is the DVD has most of these manuals on it so that you have those on your hard drive. And every one in blue is actually on the hard drive. If you click on any one of those, it'll call that manual up. So you've got it at your fingertips. You don't have to have access to the net to do that. If you look at those that have a red, that means it's distribution restricted. And what you get is if you have a CAC card in there, it'll take you to the Army Publishing Directorate website where you can actually access that manual. Okay. And then if you go to Organization of the Army and go up to brigades there, if you click on a BCT, you get a wiring diagram for that brigade. And if you click on any of the subordinate icons, it'll take you to the manual for that organization. So you can get the Infantry Battalion one here. You click on the Fires one, you get the Fires Battalion manual. And we have wiring diagrams for all the different organizations, and we'll be expanding this in future versions to get down even to company level in some cases. Next slide. Those are the 50 manuals. You'll notice that there's a block in there for branches. One of the smarter things we did is we gave every branch in the Army its own manual. That prevented a whole lot of infighting, trust me. Next slide. And then the last category are techniques publications. These are not capped in terms of length or number. We can have as many as we need on here. But what's very interesting here and what's very different from what we've done in the past is that while the top category where it says the approved departmental publication is the authenticated version, every one of those has a mirror image on a MilWiki site where any soldier with a CAC card can go in and make a recommended change to that document. So taking advantage of the most operationally experienced Army that we've ever had, we have allowed soldiers to go in there and make these changes. Every time they make a recommendation for a change, it creates a email to the proponent, and the proponent then goes in and determines whether that change is something that they want to propagate throughout the Army, whether they might need to modify it, put it in a different section, or in some cases go back to the originator and say, maybe not a bad idea in the particular environment you're in, but not applicable Army-wide, or in some cases simply reject it because frankly not all ideas are good ideas. But this is a very powerful tool that will allow soldiers to directly impact on doctrine for the Army. Next slide. In terms of timeline, we started this process of actually developing these about 15 months ago. We have now published All of the Army Doctrine publications have been, are out in hard copy. All, or 13 of the 15 ADRPs are also authenticated and published. By December of next year, we'll have all 50 of the field manuals done. And then by December 2015, we'll have all of the manuals in the Army in one of these formats. As part of our process to educate folks, we have created a box set of manuals. This has hard copies of all the ADPs. It's got the Doctrine Knowledge Map, that thing that I showed you earlier is a DVD in here, and a letter from the Chief of Staff of the Army that says, hey, this is important. This is your body of professional knowledge, and you need to understand this. So that's a basic overview of Doctrine 2015. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Sir, good morning. You mentioned earlier about the updating process. You're going to talk about that. Can you just go into briefly how we're going to sustain the development of these field manuals and ADPs and ADRPs over time?
Yeah, good question. In terms of keeping these up to date, we used to, when I first got into the doctrine business longer ago than I like to think about, we said we would review these every 5 years. And if you look at the Joint Doctrine Publication System, they do a request for feedback every 18 months. We got away from that several years ago and decided that we would update these manuals when necessary. So anytime we accumulate information that says there's a requirement for a change, we'll start the doctrine process. Now, we have already made a number of changes, even in the ADPs. In fact, I just got an email yesterday from the Chief of Staff's office asking us to change a couple of paragraphs in ADP 1. And so we've already started that process. We're going to make a change to one of the ADRPs because some information in there has been changed. For the techniques pubs, they will change on a fairly regular basis. If we've done our homework right, the ADPs, the fundamental principles, ought to be relatively steady. I mean, if they're truly fundamental principles, they should stay relatively consistent. As you go down that hierarchy, the speed of change should be much greater. But any time something happens, a change in organization, a change in the operational environment, a change in structure, a change in technology that causes us to do something different, then we can go in and change these manuals. Does that answer your question? Okay. Other questions? All right, if there are no further questions, we've got a booth over here. If you want to see demonstrations of any of these things, if you want to talk to us about it in more detail, we'll be here for the remainder of the conference. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.